I would actually love to use this conversation to demonstrate to you that, while the topic of this panel that we're about to have this amazing conversation on, it might seem less relevant. I remember the title that Bloomberg gave us was Experiment, Trust, and Scale. And I'm sure everyone, if you're not often involved in this, in the work of impact or philanthropy, you might be looking at three completely isolated word, and you're wondering what is this all about. And I hope very much after this conversation you'll realize that at the end of the day, yes, we may be talking about impact, we may be talking about philanthropy, but it is ever more relevant than you think about capital, because it is a different way of thinking about capital. I might argue, I might use the word social capital, impact capital, and I might even use the word strategic capital, because what we're doing is very strategic. So I'm really, really honored to sit alongside two giants. And I just wanted to very quickly sort of jump in because we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to start with Dr. Marianne Tsao. And from this point on, I might just call you Marianne.
Please
if
do
it's okay. And Marianne, your work has been long, first and foremost, in Singapore after you have returned home. And it's covered on the impact and philanthropy and community stage. It's very much active aging in place, and also the idea of using community coming together to create a certain type of healthcare system that is so relevant for the city and the state of Singapore. And it should actually be very relevant for Hong Kong as well, because we are also facing a rapidly aging population. But at the same time, and let me also very quickly address the background of Melissa as well. Melissa, you're a senior member of Bloomberg Philanthropies, and thank you for making the way to Asia. But in particular, you're also working on the team of Bloomberg Ocean, and today we're going to unpack Ocean a little bit more. So with that, Marianne, okay. With the work of aging well, and that spans across time, spans across a lot of different complex systems. What do you think so far is the way that private philanthropy can complement the work of the public sector?
Right. Can I just, before I answer that, just briefly comment on the relevance and the relationship between investment operating businesses as well as philanthropy?
I love that. Thank you.
Most family offices actually invest as well as in philanthropy. And I found that a lot of them are very schizophrenic. They invest whichever way in defense and tobacco, gambling, and maximize profit, and then they try to fix a problem with a bit of philanthropy. And I would say that philanthropic dollars, capital, is a drop in a bucket versus the market. So damage can make by wrong investment and try to fix it on the side doesn't make sense. So I just want to make that point that it's not like philanthropy is one pocket, investment another pocket, and the family somehow in the middle somewhere.
Absolutely.
Because it's really had to be aligned. And I think Prince Max referred to the fact that you have to be aligned, to be purpose.
Yes.
What is wealth for? And we ask that question a lot. We make a lot of money. What is wealth for? Just to keep spending on ourselves? Absolutely. I think that's really not tenable.
Yes.
So therefore, it actually has to be some way to, of course, be purposeful. So for families, family offices come with families, and families have values, families have faith, families have reputation and community. Families also want to raise their children the right way. Yes. And spending as much money as you want is definitely not the right way.
And family also has businesses, and
business
is entrenched in the society.
Exactly. So therefore, the way we run a business, the way we run an investment, the ways we do our philanthropy are all aligned in values,
yes,
and integrated.
Absolutely.
So I think I just want to make that point, because I think that's really relevant to family offices, because you don't want to do it in a very schizophrenic way whereby you run your business whichever way and make some money, investment in whichever way, and you try to fix a problem with some philanthropy. Yes. It's totally schizophrenic.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure what kind of story giving, message was sending to our generation. So yes. I think I just want to make that point.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And on the base of that point, actually, because you're already sort of talking about the integratedness, right? And coming from the family side, and going back to the original question, how do you, so from family office, family philanthropy, family businesses integrated, you're also working with a lot of other multi-sectors. A lot of time, the work of the word social work or the work social help is very much associated with also work of the government. And therefore, how do you find that integration?
Right.
Where does one stop? Where does one begin?
So just to answer your original question, because I worked in New York for a long time, and I came back to Asia many years ago because my grandmother wanted to start this foundation on aging and longevity because she noticed that modern society is unkind to old people, is what she said. Okay, so therefore, that's how I started. And then when you start to look at the whole ecosystem, I guess, suppose people in the philanthropies tend to think of ourselves more as a change maker. You want to see the outcome, and you want to plot the way to achieve the outcome you want. So at that time, I looked at the way the older people are living, the lack of social infrastructure in terms of pensions, public pensions, and all that just wasn't there. There was not many safety nets. So you have to start to think about what is it to really have systemic change?
Yes.
What is it to show the government that they need to pay attention to that the population is growing very old? It takes time for them to set up kind of pension system, to set up access to market, work access. A lot of it's going to be policy driven as well. So you have to think about government as being an important player when you look at the well-being of population when the whole population is growing older.
Yes.
And people think about people growing older as being like some old lady sitting in some corner somewhere. It's everybody. It's how it grows over time. So whether or not everyone has access to decent health care from young, so when they grow older, they're healthy, and do you have actually enough support for the family when they are caring for older people with needs. You don't want to send everyone to a nursing home. You don't want, and that's not affordable for anybody in every way, not for family, not for society, not for economy. So you kind of start thinking about what does it take. So first you have to have an understanding and have enough research. So the first thing we did was actually commission research to understand what does it look like when a community grow older in Singapore, was where I was at the time, and then looking at other countries, how do other people deal with this issue? So we have some evidence to start with.
Absolutely.
And we start looking at how to kind of engage the government from advocacy point of view and educate them. So we bring in the research evidence, we bring in big name people, the CV is so thick they can't they just have to shut up and listen to people speak. And then so start thinking about what does it take to solve some immediate problems. So if the academic research from philanthropy point of view that we say we need to do research, as a matter of fact, from the first seed funds for research, eventually the government set up a whole research center on aging and care because they start to understand that no evidence, you can't do good policy, nor can you evaluate whether any of the policy made sense.
Yes.
So therefore, the initial philanthropic dollar was able to get seed money to create an entire center on research to give us information to work on. The second thing is, of course, the experts who can inform the policymakers. We paid for it because they weren't thinking about it. No one's thinking about it. And ground up, there are all kinds of issues that people are not getting care. And then we also created the service models that gave the initial grant that with time can get evidence show that these services make sense, then oftentimes the government will come in.
Absolutely.
And I would say that even more times the event that's government funded is never 100%. So there's always a space for private philanthropy coming in. So I think that philanthropists play that catalytic role, that de-risking kind of capital, to take risk in experimentation, to pilot things that might work, and then you demonstrate the evidence. And we failed. It was our money, okay? But government, of course, cannot take public money and have them fail regularly. So we take the advantage of using our own capital and then create evidence, whether service models or whatever, that the government can more comfortably step in. Because governments are risk adverse.
Yes.
Governments are rules driven. And when you want change, it's about making new rules or breaking rules. So that's when private philanthropy can play a real role. But for us, actually, frankly, it's helped us our investment because we know the aging space so well that we actually start to know that we have to invest in service and products that can meet the need of older individuals. Maybe not exclusively, but the population growing older, they need everything, not just care. They need travel, they want fashion, they want to eat. There are many things, just a different customer base. So if you know what they are, then of course you can make better investments as well.
So this is already one demonstration of that relevance between, I would say, social capital or philanthropy or social work with investment capital. You try to identify the problems through scientific process, for example, and through identification of the problem, you're doing due diligence. The whole research is a due diligence process, just like investment. And through that process, there is an output, in your case, actually, of investable idea that would be translated actually into a potentially market rate kind of return. Turning over to Melissa, I'm going to combine sort of, so obviously, in your work and coming from even Michael's work, for example, his work across a lot of large-scale social large-scale issues, global, social, city, potentially even empowering the politicians, for example. So what has been sometimes what has been your experiences, when people criticize that large-scale philanthropy may be too top-down, not adaptable, not relevant to the everyday people? How do you respond to that? How do you change from it? But at the same time, then when you sometimes have a private-driven experiment, a little bit more of a risk-taking social approach, and maybe it works. How do you then also go from bottom up to scale up to the national, international level?
Great questions. And I would say that Mike Bloomberg has always followed the data. That's how he got his start in the financial industry. And there's the saying, in God we trust, everyone else bring the data. I think that the way that philanthropy can avoid the accusation that it is being top-down is by really understanding the evidence base, getting down to ground and understanding the community needs. And Mike Bloomberg, not only in his role as entrepreneur, but also as three-term mayor of New York City, he saw where the rubber was meeting the road on all of these social and economic issues on a daily basis. That's where I got my start in working with Mike Bloomberg. Was in the sustainability office. So I was thinking through, what I had to offer family offices here in Asia. I am not a member of a family office, but I am part of the Bloomberg family. And I was really struck by the Prince's comments earlier around establishing a common set of values, establishing either a constitution or some way of thinking that you're passing down not only to your family members, but to your employees, to the institutions that you're supporting. And I think that the ethos that you bring to the way that you run your company, the way that you establish your investments, and how you treat the people in your communities really helps kind of round out how you're thinking about philanthropy. And to your question about the levels of involvement of philanthropy, again, I think Mike Bloomberg his reputation has been around bringing people together. So unusual suspects from government to the private sector to community members, and fostering the kinds of hard conversations that lead to ideas, innovation, and new solutions. So my responsibility is running the Ocean Initiative, and when I started in this role, I had no experience in working in marine biology, but I had a lot to offer in terms of interest and curiosity. And what really piqued my excitement about the role was that Mike Bloomberg's focus in his philanthropy has always been very centered on humans. The mission of the organization is to improve or to increase the number of people who have better, longer lives around the world. How does the ocean fit into that? 3 billion people rely on the ocean for their livelihoods and for the nutrition. And that really got me thinking about how, the economics of these types of investments, being able to lift these communities up and professionalize the kinds of activities that they're already up to that are sustaining their families, helps grow the local economy, but also builds a constituency of engaged and responsible advocates for themselves and other communities like their own. So I think that's how we think about our catalytic approach.
Fantastic. We'll eventually. Actually, let me
quick response to what Melissa was saying. I would say that sometimes we'll think, what would one family foundation do, right? But I think that if you think much bigger, understand the landscape, you can do a lot more. So I've been running this family foundation for quite a while. And I would say that because of what we do in Singapore, and because we're able to develop, sort of convene a whole network of NGOs, academics work across Asia, from South Asia, Southeast Asia, part of East Asia, that we're able to work along with the UN. There are actually specific passages in the UN that the member states have to respond to that I wrote because of expertise. Okay, so I think it's important that you can work in many different layers, not just in the country you work in, but across the region. And of course, if you can convene people, it becomes a collective, that you can become the voice that can advocate at the international multilateral level.
Absolutely.
So I think that there are many ways that well, okay, we're not tiny, but we're not huge, right? But we're not a Gates or something. But influence can be much, much greater if you're strategic about how you build a relationship on the ground and you advocate at the multilateral level, the highest level. So I think that just want to say that don't think that your ability is limited because what you do, but can be much expanded. How can strategic convene networks together? How can we have a common voice based on evidence? And how are we able to actually then support our peers to advocate in their own country as well at the multinational level? And at the UN level, if you actually have some of the documents that are declarations that are actually that the member state have to adhere to and report on. If you actually are able to influence how those documents are written, it can actually have very wide-ranging kind of impact. So I just want to say that.
I love that, and this is so beautiful. It also speaks to the idea of, an individual agent, but with expertise. But it's important to remember that expertise takes time and effort to acquire and develop. But with that expertise, and with recently a term that I've modeled after from Peggy Delaney, is bridging. Taking a leadership to be able to actually build bridges, which is potentially in the format of convening, but really sort of thinking strategically. Around different agents to be able to sort of bring shared interests, shared resources together. That's really the only way for us to very quickly scale up and make the necessary influences. I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to switch over to family office conversation, and then we'll come back to Ocean. So with respect to family office, Marianne, you have multiple roles.
Right.
You sit on a council that actually you chair the council, you chair the family office in this triennial period, as well as the foundation. And obviously you came first and foremost from that foundation angle into the family, the rest of the activities. In the process of thinking about governance and also integration, how do you allow for the family in a very structured way integrate value, and a lot of time probably values of different individual members of the families, and really integrate that through the family office activities without breaching fiduciary lines. That is very important for governance.
Right. So I think it takes time for sure. As a matter of fact, when our family started this journey, it was about 2007. So my parents growing older at that time, and the four of us on my generation were G4, fourth generation. We do different things. I was a public health physician running a foundation that's operational for Asian longevity. And then my brother runs family business and shipping and all that. And then we have a brother was an architect in New York, and then a sister was in the food systems in Hong Kong. So we're four different countries, four different fields, and coming together for the first time saying, well, as a family, my parents are growing older, what to do? At that time, we couldn't even get through a conversation without an argument in 5 minutes. Somebody would say something, somebody would pissed off, and somebody would storm out of the room. Okay, so with a lot of love, but obviously cannot get very far. So actually, we really went through a process of working with it started with a dialogue coach. I thought our problem because we don't know how to have a dialogue. So we had a dialogue coach that set up some rules about how the rules of engagement, like don't talk too long, you have to raise your hand. It was the basic rules of engagement to a point where we really tried to understand each other. So then he brought in a family therapist. We talked every quarterly from 2007 to 2014. For us to finally understand who we are as a family, what are the values that bind us, respect for each other's differences, and acceptance for who we are as a whole. And that became the base of our family charter. That family charter became the basis on which we started a family office, the way we do philanthropy, the way we do business, the way we raise our children, the way we lead our life. So as diverse as we are, the four of us, we're able to really understand each other and respect each other's expertise. So we thought that we can all four of us come together. We've got lots of expertise, a huge network, an ability to collectively deploy our relatively not small family assets for not just for the family, but for the public good. So I think that was the most important, the most valuable investment we ever did as a family, okay, to be able to come together, understand what binds us together, and respect the differences we have. And we've been now able to run all kinds of things because we can have quite good conversations. As a matter of fact, my niece came back from LA a year ago, and she remembered as a child before she went to LA, these aunties and uncles were having, these intense debates, or more like arguments. And she was quite amazed at the first call we had. She sat in, she goes, wow, you guys actually can talk and come to conclusion because we can. And it took a lot of practice to do that. So every once in a while, being the chair, I chair the family office and chair those meetings.
Yes.
I have to read everyone the rules of engagement before we start.
Every single time.
Every time. As a matter of fact, before with a meeting with our family office, so we don't fight in front of our staff, we will have a meeting before and iron everything out and come to reasonable conclusions, and then we go and have a meeting with our family office staff so that we can get a conclusion of why. So we hash it all out in the family. I mean, I had a conversation with one of the participants here about the family dynamics and the struggle it takes to bring it together. Yes. But it takes the commitment to stick with it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's really important. And the second thing I want to say is that actually the philanthropy. When we started on the philanthropy journey, I've been doing it for a long time, but the rest of them didn't understand what at all. We worked with the philanthropy consultant every Thursday night for a year. For all of us to understand what it means, what philanthropy means to us, and how we would want to do it, how to organize, how to allocate money, how much for the young ones to experiment, maybe $10,000 or less, and how to organize a governance of who will make decisions about what, and so mostly around projects of certain larger quantum, right? So who can make decisions under $500,000? Well, we require people over $5 million, so therefore we have a very clear understanding of how family will work together, and we respect that. So there's no discussion or argument about why you get to do this project, somebody doesn't, because it's all very above board because we agreed. And I think now we're on to the next generation, G5. So now G5 ranged from 22, 23 to 42, a very wide group of people, very diverse interests. So now this chairman also now develops kind of these the family retreats,
yes,
and see how it can then take the family charter, be able to start engage the next generation, for them to understand what it means to be a Tsao, and what our expectation of each other, how we want to lead our life, and therefore how we want to do everything else, right?
So continuously re-engineering and evolving.
Constantly.
That learning journey actually for the family, it should never stop. Right. I will very quickly mention also in one of the siblings, there is one that is very passionate about ocean.
Yes.
Right? So obviously, in part of the philanthropy and under the family office investments on the impact side, there's also ocean activities as well. And therefore, on your position, particularly on Bloomberg Ocean side, now come here in Hong Kong, and I know that previously we were talking about your observation, your previous exposure, maybe over the last year in Asia, in our friendly states in Singapore, I would say particularly now, two primary questions. Why now? Why Asia? What would you want Hong Kong family offices to know about, the work and mandate of Bloomberg Ocean, and also if you can, based on the 1 year of observation in Asia, what has been the development? What do you think sort of the trajectory of growth can be? Particularly for the family offices here in Hong Kong to be able to really get on board on this amazing mission of One Ocean. What are we supposed to do?
All right, those are some big questions. I'll start with your why now. The climate crisis is upon us, and the ocean is one of the top regulators of the climate system, but it's a threat and a solution. And the science is telling us that minimum 30% of the world's nature, which includes the ocean, needs to be protected in order to maintain a functioning system for human health, for biodiversity, and for the climate system. So the why now is this is what the world is calling for. This is what the climate crisis is calling for. And it's different than cutting emissions. It's about protecting what we already have. And I think that the inspiration that I saw in Montreal when the Global Biodiversity Framework was first put into place and established this 30% target, while multilateralism is under threat now, I really think that with the High Seas Treaty, which is maybe not on the tip of everyone's tongue, but in the ocean space, it's the hot new thing. It means governance in an area of the sort of Earth's surface that's never been possible before. These are new ways of working together across jurisdictions, across different kind of sectors. And I think that this is a moment for us to realize what we can do together in terms of protecting areas, but also establishing the kinds of systems that will allow for more benefit sharing for the Earth's resources. The other question that was built into what you were saying was, what's Asia's role and what have I observed? So I've now been to Hong Kong 3 times, to Singapore a couple times. I was just, though, in Busan, South Korea last year, where Asian leadership on ocean issues was so clear. And out of that good experience, where they were really focused on how to deliver technology, AI, and all the kinds of economic sort of investments that they see the potential of the ocean creating for their economy, they really see this as not just something that's good for the planet, but something that is essential for the health of their the health of their heritage. Even we visited some of the Henyo women, who some of you may recognize as sort of these icons, these amazing women who've passed through a matrilineal process. The stewardship of their coastal resources. And so I think that it's just built into a lot of Asian society, this sort of stewardship, this guardianship of the marine environment. But it's not been something that's been expressed in through philanthropy or even through some major kind of policy commitments. But that's changing. I think South Korea is one example, but China has put in a bid to host the Secretariat for the High Seas Treaty. And I think that opens up a massive opportunity, because some of the largest fleets in the open ocean are Chinese. It's also obviously a real geopolitical concern, where we need to be thinking about what it means for governance to have some of the largest players really driving some of the decision making about ocean protection. Yeah. So I think Asia has an enormous role to play. They've already, a lot of countries in Asia have demonstrated this interest. And in terms of the philanthropies, the donor community and the family offices, I've heard a lot of curiosity, and I've heard a lot of, well, what does impact look like? How does this affect the bottom line of some of the businesses that we're interested in, from offshore renewables to shipping? And I look to you. This is a learning community that you're developing, and we're happy to foster the convening here. And I'm happy to bring back networks of our own on marine philanthropy and ocean science to help kind of build the expertise and the understanding that will lead to even more investment in ocean conservation.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I just want to comment, not that I know so much about ocean, but my family is a maritime business. We've been traditional shipping family for 4 generations. So I think my key point is actually is we have doing philanthropy or investment. You need to know what our pressing issues are. You have to be better informed. I knew nothing about climate when I first started out, but of course anyone would tell you that climate is a major issue. We reached a tipping point. Yes. So actually we organized learning journeys from my family. Climate specialists, people from learning, just talk to us, teach us about what the issues are. Then we have a better sense of the lay of the land that we're able to say what a critical area that we can do something about. So therefore, as a maritime business family, shipping family, so the first thing is that from the business side, we're trying to look at what we can do to decrease this negative impact, right? So we're investing in research on better fuel, more efficient, engine-efficient ships. We look at how we can contribute to new philanthropies. Like in Singapore, there's this new organization called Global Maritime Decarbonization Center. And a lot of the people with shipping business actually provide some seed grant for it because we're interested in how we can look at alternative fuel for shipping. You can't put, windmills, you can't put shipping is tricky, but you need to move things from point A to point B. It's a useful business, but you do need to reduce this carbon footprint. So I think that the philanthropist businesses can actually give money to do that kind of evidence kind of thing. And the second thing is that, that is, of course, the collaborations. So our family business, of course, collaborated with OceanX, with Catapult, and others have strong interest in ocean. I knew nothing about it until I went to Davos this year because the family business had these kind of collaborations. I had to learn more about it. And the more you learn, the more you start to appreciate how important this is, how important that we actually put our resource into as philanthropists. And so, of course, the more we learn, we also investment opportunity that we have as well. So I think that my own main message is that if you're a philanthropist, you have to know what you're looking at. Because when we make investment, we do our due diligence. We really turn things inside out before we put a dollar in there. But when it comes to philanthropy, we don't do that. We just give the money without thinking about what are we trying to do, what outcome we're trying to achieve. If you don't know enough, you won't be able to be making good social investments or good environment investments. So I would urge people to know what you're looking at. Learn about things.
Exactly. Otherwise, it would have been such a waste, actually, of all the resources that we're able to, to amass from our hard-earned business money. With that, we're at time, actually, but I do want to sort of pick up on a few last points. We talk about a lot of convening. We're sitting in one, but obviously, you're experiencing also the resurgence, I suppose, of a lot of these different convenings in Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, I welcome all of you to come back a lot more often. And I think, earlier our secretary has mentioned something about the work of Hong Kong Academy for Wealth Legacy, and we're supposed to do more. So I've been told. And one of that more thing is really through convening to be able to also ultimately really sort of create that environment for important ecosystem partners, starting from family office, but also the family people and the family foundations, the entire related parties, I suppose, that represent different knowledge, different resources to be able to come together, not just in Hong Kong, but also across the border. Because the kind of problems or challenges that we're trying to tackle are global in nature, and whether we like it or not, we just have to deal with it. But at the same time, the opportunities that is in front of us could also be global in nature. So would really welcome everybody to be a part of the learning journey that many of us are trying very hard to not just cultivate, but also to be a lot more intentional about. And you also talk about sort of outgoing, potentially learning tours and things like that. So I think it's okay for me to do a little bit of advertisement. The Academy actually organizes outgoing learning tours. And the one that is very relevant to Ocean and to Bloomberg Ocean initiative, as well as the global ocean movement, is in fact happening every year. The Blue Economy Finance Forum, hosted by the Monaco Foundation, which the Academy through Impact Link is also in strategic partnership with, just like how we are in strategic partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies. So this is the kind of opportunities that are available on a global scale for all of us to take some time to pay attention and study a little bit more. And I really just welcome all of you to be a part of this journey. Thank you so much, and thank you both for your time.
Thank you.